Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, sponsored in part by The Pursuit of Wisdom, a series of free short courses on a variety of topics presented by the faculty of Ave Maria University. We invite you to start learning today by downloading the Pursuit of Wisdom app or visiting thepursuitofwisdom.org. I'm your host, Michael Dauphinais, and today I am joined by my good friend and colleague, Dan Guernsey. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Exactly. So Dr. Guernsey is the Associate Professor of Education and founding director of our Master of Education and Catholic School Leadership at Ave Maria University. He is a senior fellow for the Cardinal Newman Society and has been a principal of a Catholic grade school and Catholic high school for over 17 years. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Wow. So we're delighted to have you on the show, and we really want to dive in today to why is it so important to get Catholic education right, both for the church but also for the society. And maybe just to begin, I want to pose the question, which is, why do we need Catholic education at all? Doesn't it seem like education is reading, writing, arithmetic? Doesn't seem you need Jesus for that. So why not just kind of leave education to the state?
Good question. I think we need to ask, what are we trying to do with education? And what we're trying to do is form the human person. And the human person comes to us as a unity of mind, body, and spirit. So actually the state, it's not the purview of the state to reach deeply into the spiritual level. So the state can do education, but it cannot do complete education. It cannot do perfect education. Only the Catholic Church can do perfect education because it has the authority and the wisdom to move within all those realms. So why? Because Catholic education is the best way of educating, and if it's available to you, then it is the best path to choose.
Wow, that's great. And it is interesting if you think about that. The skills are part of education, but education is about the person.
Yes.
So ultimately, you are going to be saying something about what does it mean to be human, right? That question can't be avoided. And I think it was Pope Benedict the 16th when he came to the United States in 2008 and gave an address to Catholic educators at CUA. And he said, right, basically at the heart of all Catholic education is the encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. And if education is about one person communicating to another person the meaning of what does it mean to be a person, then like Jesus Christ and his perfection, right, is really what's kind of at the heart of education. It's like I want you to get to know ultimately, right, the person that I got to know,
right.
And the person who created the world and is present in the world, but also present in the church, who came to not only, right, who didn't only create the world, but also came to restore the world. So within a view of Catholic education, it seems like we not only have the reality and facts of creation unfolded, but we also have an understanding of the human person, right, that the human person is both good and wounded and needs kind of healing and restorative practices.
Right? Yeah. That address he talks about, as you mentioned, it's this steps of love and then knowledge and then witness. You know, you fall in love with something, and then you want to know it better and know it more, and then once you know it more, you simply have to share it. It's this natural process that develops, and of course we start as Christians from this love and knowledge of Christ, but then understanding who Christ is and who we are in the creation of God, then creates this other level of love and knowledge and witness. So then we start loving math, we start loving poetry, we start loving science, we start loving the relationships that human beings form together, and then we want to learn more about them, and then we want to share that with others. That's what teachers do. And that's what we want our students to be able to do. But it starts with this approach to education that is not mercenary, but celebration-oriented in that mix. And so that's kind of what we're trying to capture in Catholic education. And I think classical education has some sense of that, but really in Catholic education we can do it the most fully because we can actually celebrate and praise and give worship in the education as well as just going, wow, that was nice. It was like, this is amazing. Pray with me now.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Well, let's celebrate what we've learned and just come to the fullness of our humanity, which is ultimately destined for union with God.
Yes.
It's not destined for college or career, although that's maybe part of our destiny. Yeah. That's just the route we go to get to the end.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And I love that aspect of celebration, right? We celebrate liturgy, not always the way we feel when we're doing it, but it's a celebration. And it's the that sense of wonder and maintaining wonder in education, which, the Greeks saw at times, but it's been sustained for 2,000 years through the history of the church and the educational initiatives that the church has sponsored.
And one could argue that it's under attack now, and maybe not in a unique way, but in a very powerful way with the cynicism and jadedness that is attacking so many of our young people. Now, it's not just in our age; it's happened in other ages. But with the development of technology and development of modernity, where we're at right now, is this disconnect with reality and with the celebration of reality is just massive. But it also leaves a tremendous opportunity for educators to step in with joy and excitement and really bring that life-giving message of love of God, but also taking our role in creation as giving praise to God, for it and through it.
Yeah, I love the fact that we can fall more in love with creation and the created order when we see that creation itself is an act of God's love.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't to include God as revealed in Jesus Christ doesn't take away, but in a way renews our love of everything that's human and everything that's created.
Yeah. That's one of the taglines we use in Catholic education, right? We teach more. We have more to say. We have more to do. So back to your initial questions, yes, we do the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, the history, the math, the same things, but there's more.
Yeah.
There's more. And that more, it really helps, I think, spark the human soul, or can help spark the human soul and the human drive to learn more and to open oneself up to more of reality.
Yeah. So you had been teaching, or you've been the principal, at Donahue Academy in Ave Maria for maybe about, off and on for about a decade or so.
Yep.
And then you recently came to Ave Maria University to start a graduate program in educational leadership, Catholic. And this is something you've been working on off and on for 20 years.
I was about to say, I didn't come here to do this is why I originally came to Ave Maria back in the day with Mr. Monahan, because he knew from his experience with Domino's that good leadership made for a good and successful pizza place. And he saw that, and he could see that. And so he said, well, the premise will hold for Catholic schools too. We need good leaders. If we have good leaders, we can have a greater chance to impact Catholic education more quickly and dramatically. And so he initially wanted this program to be part of the original iteration of the university. But again, God's plan works in his time, and there was other work to do. Yeah. But now here we are. But the role of a leader and the leader's ability to keep and advance the mission is essential.
Yeah, and so this program that you've developed is going to kind of get to the heart of what Catholic education is and pass on that vision to educational administrators or leaders, principals and others, who will then share that vision with parents and teachers and students.
Right.
And, of course, we also at Ave Maria have an undergraduate program in education as well. And so you've set up a course, and I thought this would be kind of a fun way to kind of dive into kind of what makes Catholic education really, what is it and why do we need it. So you have a course, I think, at the graduate level, this one that's called Catholic Education, History, Philosophy, Vision, and Mission, right? It's kind of everything. I think at the undergraduate level, something like Foundations of Education, a little less grand. But I like this one. We need to know its history, philosophy, vision, and mission. And I thought it'd be great to let the audience today just get a little window into what might it be for somebody you've been studying and teaching in this area for over 30 years. Is that correct?
Yep.
and working. So you're, as we were talking, right, education is also a practical art. One both studies it but also has to try it,
right,
and learn what works. And I think we really – I just love to hear a little bit about what are some of the goals of the course and what are some of the – I think right now we have there's a real crisis of education that's going on in the West, in modernity, in our contemporary society. What's education for? How do we help people want to live,
right,
and figure out how to live,
right,
and figure out that life is good, right? These are real challenges. So maybe could you just say a little bit about some of the challenges that you see and some of the key principles that we want to look at? Maybe we could start with maybe a little bit of this history.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is why this course? What are we trying to do with this master's degree to form this next generation of Catholic leaders? So we want to make sure that we have set the table correctly, that we are speaking the language of the Church, the intent of the Church for her Catholic schools, so that we're not just producing people with skill sets to manipulate people hopefully for good, but we want to have them to have skills in communication and budgeting and curriculum and discipline and negotiation, all of that stuff, and we absolutely do all of that. But all of those are means to what end? And if we don't have the end right, then the means can go astray, and we can just be producing leaders for more mediocre Catholic schools or maybe even problematic Catholic schools. So how do we get to produce the leaders for excellent Catholic schools? Well, the first thing a leader needs to know is, where are we going? Where are we going? And somebody might come in with their own vision of Catholic education, but we don't necessarily want them to take their vision of Catholic education forward. We want them to understand where is the Church's expectation here, and then how can you do that? So that's where this course is set, is to set the course correctly from the heart of the Church, so that the leadership is not haphazard or just taking what's already naturally in the community that you inherit. When you take on your first principalship, it's just easy to say, well, this is the way we do things here, and here's where we go. And if you're going to try to change a school, you shouldn't be changing it because this is the way I want to do things. You should be changing it because here is my suggestion about what the Church expects of this school and how can we do this together. But we're going to follow the agenda of the Church, not the agenda of Dan Guernsey or whoever the principal's in front of them. And that leads for a better change. And then your people can join you and have confidence that this is what we're doing. So you've got to start unpacking all that stuff, right?
Yes,
so where do you go to find that out?
So you mentioned, I think in 1929, Pius XI has a Davini Ilius Magistery, which is a document that I see you make front and center in the course. There's another one, Gravisicimum educazioni, right? Which is and are those maybe like two that you think are really kind of pivotal?
Yes. I think those, and then the other document, the Catholic schools. Those are the big three. Interestingly enough, Davini I only came across in the last couple of years. I've been my whole career without it because I just went straight to Gravisimum, Vatican II, and then on. And then I got cued into this by another Ave Maria University professor who was teaching this in her class. I'm like, what? Somebody else is teaching this document? I better go check it out. And then I found out, wow, this is one of the source documents for what Gravisimum says and what the Church says. It's so well written and so foundational that I just got so excited about it. And then my students, when they come into the class, it's the same thing because we're out there in a jumble in Catholic education going, we should be doing this, we should be doing this, and how are all these relations fit together? And Pius just kind of comes in so clearly and says, he says, there is no true education which is not a Christian education, going back to those principles we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And he talks about what's the order here? And he says there are three orders. The first order is the Church in the supernatural order, the family in the natural order, and then the state in the political order to support the family. So we all know in Catholic education that the parents are the primary educators, but the Church is the primordial educator. So the Church is the perfect society. The family is imperfect because it lacks what it needs for the fullness of its development, namely Christ and which the church brings to the family. And then the state's responsibility is to do everything possible to make sure those parents get those children an education. So he's very aggressive on telling the states to pony up and to step up and then stay out of the way of the families as they do that and stay out of the way of the church. So he really privileges the church's position and says, by the way, let's just get this straight about what's happening here. Right? God has given us this commission, and this is what the families do. And then the state, you stay out of the way, but the children are not yours. You have a responsibility to support the families to make sure they can get education, what they need, but they're not yours, state. Hands off.
Yeah, it's really
it's a good document.
It's powerful, and 1929 may sound old to some of our viewers and listeners, but it's about 100 years ago, and in the early part of the 20th century, we're facing a lot of the same situations we're facing today. The rise of communism in the Soviet Union had happened earlier. There was a lot of the kind of aggressive secular republics after the French Revolution and other elements. So a lot of this, there was a rather aggressive trying to push the church out of education and have the state not just step in, but kind of almost the state steps in as the new church and creates a whole vision of the human person in the state's own image, which is basically creating functionaries for the state. Yeah,
to the state's benefit.
To the state's benefit.
Right. And that's okay because the state is part of the natural order. It's natural to have a nation and it's natural to have communities. But yes, what was happening is, again, when you think about education as we know it today in a traditional school where the school, beyond the one-room schoolhouse, that's not even 50 years old at this time. It's 1880s before people really start doing stuff with education. It's not till the turn of the century, the 1900s, that you really start getting schools like we really experience them today. So it's not that old. But what was happening, as you say, is at the early days, guys like Dewey in the American system were setting up, and Horace Mann were setting up our system, but they were setting it up with a modernist American paradigm. Again, that's not completely wrong, but we have to understand that it's not Catholic and it's not complete. It's pragmatic utilitarianism. And so that's at the heart of our country as a Protestant country, which then went to pragmatic utilitarianism, which then came into our schools, which is then crowded out from the Catholic perspective, elements of reality and human flourishing that belong in a fully equipped school. And so we want to make sure parents are aware that there is more to education than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. You can't, because you're always reading something. What are you reading, and what is that thing that you're reading? You don't just teach them how to read letters. You're done with that in second grade. What are you going to read for the next 12 years? Just more reading letters? It's like, no, you're actually reading philosophy and worldviews and everything else. But the worldview in America, which started out Protestant, then through Dewey and the others has gone utilitarian, and now we're in complete secular modernist atheist relativism. In fact, we open up the course that I teach here with a book on relativism, because that is the water that our families and our children are swimming in. If you're going to lead, you're going to have to confront relativism head on and not give into it, or you are going to wind up then going down the track of DEI and all these other isms and all these other things. So we have to include that foundational premise on what are we doing here, and how do we exist in the world, and how do we interpret reality, and is there a reality to interpret? So these are great, fantastic questions to get into to talk about. So I love it.
No, that's really great to hear. And so John Dewey, the one it comes up with a vision in a way for state education, all oriented to the training of the worker, basically, right? It's just practical skills. No, you're right. But I mean, he did also was the training of the citizen. So I mean, he was, did want to see people committed to service and committed to the nation. But he's coming in from that pragmatic utilitarian mindset, which says, right and wrong is determined by what
the people want and determine. It's not based on some transcendent value or some God or some goal outside of ourselves. We're just going to get together as a group of people and say, what's the best way we can flourish? And we're not going to we're not necessarily going to exclude religion, because it can be kind of helpful in some ways. But our mission right here is just to kind of pragmatically get at it so we can do great things. And it's very American, and there's much that's okay with it, but there's some stuff missing.
Yeah. And it also, one of the things that you could say it also creates, or it sets the stage for a real disillusionment that has actually happened over the last 100 and plus years, where you focus on kind of building not necessarily an earthly utopia, but everything is focused on the earthly realm of having a better society, better individuals, better fit for a better society. And then, but societies are also incomplete and inadequate, and they have lots of corruption. And it seems like what's then happened in the second half of the 20th century is, with maybe a little bit more of a Marxist bent than Dewey, is they just, you discover that actually the society has a lot of corruption within it, and then let's just get rid of the whole thing, right? Let's tear it down instead of, the earthly city, I almost use Augustine's term, but the earthly city is only part of our goal. It's never going to be perfected. But it's worth doing. It's worth sustaining, because it's part of our journey onto a better city. And I think when we reject God and the promises of God and the order of God, and we put all our kind of eggs into the earthly city almost inevitably will disappoint.
Yes.
And it seems like that's what we end up with, either the kind of Deweyan optimism of the early utilitarian pragmatics that we can actually fix, we can fix things through practical education, to then this kind of despair and disillusionment, and you move from a utopian view to a dystopian one.
Yeah, yes, I think you're correct, and that's where a lot of our schools are at right now, which is why many of our parents are realizing this. It's no longer a safe place to send our students, because the stakes are so high and the bottom has fallen out, and that we're simply left with the will to power. And secular humanism as a basis, and then so we've devolved into the what some call the empire of desire, right? It's what do you want, and what you want is what we will help you get, and that can be divorced from community, it can be divorced from reality, it can be divorced from God, it can be that's the basis is your desire and reason, and if we can get as much stuff as they want, let's go try that. Yeah. But maybe they really don't know what they want, or maybe they've been confused, especially for the children.
Yeah, and it's a dangerous place to be when we use all of our reasoning skills simply to fill what we want. Yeah. When reason is really there to figure out what we genuinely want, and to learn that many of our wants are actually not helpful. Right.
Yeah, we've become so focused on ourselves and looking into ourselves and our emotions and our needs, that really what we should be doing as well is looking out and looking at the world and at creation, at the others around us, and then also trying to figure out how does that fit into the great complexities that are the reality with which I'm confronted, and is there meaning to it, and how do all these relationships work? And then from the Christian perspective, of course, we have that framework to work within. But without that perspective, you're really left with just it's me against the others, and maybe I can use them to some benefit, and maybe we can all get along, maybe we can't. But that's just not it doesn't seem to be a very effective or conducive to authentic human joy.
Yeah, we were one time during the semester we were talking about Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Emile, and in some ways I think Rousseau's another figure that's really dominated a lot of modern educational theories, and it's this sort of sense that within the child is just it's the sheer desires of the child that ought to kind of shape education. And obviously there's part of that can be helpful. Obviously children have a lot of wonderful desires, a desire to play, but this is not Maria Montessori. Mm-hmm. This is more of a glorification of the kind of the ego and almost the libido in some ways for Rousseau. Could you say a little bit about how that kind of creates like a mindset, though, that really has harmed education?
Yes. I mean, right now, the dominant philosophy in many schools is constructivism. So it's this idea that we want the child to construct their own knowledge and construct their own meaning. So everything is based on kind of the desire and the impulses and the experience of the child. So it's very experientially based. And again, there's really good stuff with that. There's some good stuff in Rousseau as well. His fundamental flaw is he rejects the fall. He rejects original sin. And so the idea is, for Rousseau and some of these folks, is if we just get society and the church and all the white male patriarchy or whatever else you want to call it, if we just get all of this stuff out of the child and leave the child in the most natural state possible, the child will come to his own and flourish. And that just doesn't work. It's just not true. And it all seems like a nice thing. And, Rousseau is like, well, even for teaching is just let the child learn, and you stand by as the guide on the side and you let them explore, and you really shouldn't be lecturing them and telling them all of these things. But then he spends a 500-page book lecturing us not to lecture the others. He goes on for pages and pages and pages telling us how he instructed this student, Emile, to go through life and explore as he's going through. And it's like, well, shouldn't you just allow us to do that as teachers then? Is not write this book, but just tell us, hey, go figure it out. And it's so they mean well, and it's nice, but it's so thin, and it's thin gruel. And the kids and the consequence, can get destroyed. Yeah. And so what we need to do is saying, yes, we want to activate our children's freedom, but that comes in stages. And it comes within a context of not just giving into desires, but ordering desires as towards their proper ends, so that we can achieve what we were made to do, which is more than just satisfy our desires. We were made for each other and for sacrifice and for love, with the giving of the self.
And part of the beauty of human culture and human wisdom and human traditions is that I don't have to figure everything out for myself. Right, yes. I can rely upon the wisdom of, I don't have to figure out, is marriage a thing? I can say, marriage is a thing.
Right.
I want to get married one day. I don't have to kind of figure out, should marriage it's like that's really hard if I have to start from scratch. If human civilization and human society has to start from scratch every generation, we're going to be very primitive in our moral. In our pursuit of happiness. Our pursuit of happiness will be gravely limited.
Right, but to your analogy with the marriage is they don't want to start from scratch. What they want to do in the example of marriage is they want to be able to fornicate. In order to fornicate, I have to get rid of the tradition because the tradition tells me it's wrong. So I have to get rid of that tradition. Well, how do I get rid of the tradition? Well, we have to get rid of all traditions. And then, it's kind of Edward Shree's argument in his book on relativism. He says, you scratch your relativist and you get to a sinner. You get to somebody who's trying to justify that I want to do what I want to do, whether it's drinking or sex or eating too much or greed or whatever. Once I get rid of that stuff, then I'm free to satisfy my will. But you're right. But you're right. It doesn't work that way in the world because you have to use language. We have to learn how to read. We have to we have to learn math. We have to do all of these things. We don't just make up.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis, in one of his Chronicles of Narnia series, in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and later in the Silver Chair, we're introduced to the Experiment House, which is a progressive school from the 30s and 40s in England, and he says basically, they let the teachers and the administrators let the kids do kind of whatever they want, both in terms of learning and everything else. And he says it turns out what a lot of the kids wanted to do were, well, at least the most powerful kids spend most of their time bullying the other kids. And this is just what human beings do to each other. And it's not that kids don't have wonderful, and we ought to really find ways to help their own desires thrive and flourish, by introducing them into a much richer culture of a way of being human. And so I think that's a great way of putting it. We're going to take a break, and then when we come back, I want to dive into a little bit more of some of the highlights from this course, and really highlights from this vision. I love it. It's the history, philosophy, vision, and mission of Catholic education. That's a great topic. So we'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University and sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle. Through their generous donations of $10 or more per month, Annunciation Circle members directly support the mission of AMU to be a fountainhead of renewal for the Church through our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. To learn more, visit avemaria.edu/join. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
We've been talking about Catholic education and really why it's so needed, and some of the errors into which secular education can fall as the state begins to replace the Church in terms of offering a kind of a holistic vision of what does it mean to be human, or perhaps maybe just saying that there is no great vision of what it means to be human, and each person has to choose it and create it for themselves. And I think this idea, as we were talking about in 1929, Pius XI, Davini, Ilius, Magistery, that ultimately, the Church is the educator, right? The Church teaches us how to be human, teaches us how to be both wounded and healed, and then the role of the family as secondary, right? And then third, the role of the kind of state comes in to support the Church and the family. And this idea, that the individual does not exist immediately connected to the state, but that the Church the individual is first part of a family, part of a society, and part of a church. Right, and I think that's such a powerful vision, and so,
and yet the person is the same no matter what educational environment they're in. So one of the things we're seeing in education right now, some of the listeners may have heard of social emotional learning, like SEL is sometimes what it's called, because the students in public schools do have spiritual needs. They do have spiritual crises. They do have emotional needs and and with the Catholic school, we work so closely with the parents, understanding that they're primary educators, that if we're working in the areas of social, emotional, and spiritual, we're very open with the families, and they share with us the vision that we're offering, which is one of the reasons why we have to be clear about what our vision is. Because you're working with your, as one of the Vatican documents says, you're writing on the souls of human people when you're an educator.
Yes.
So you have to do that with the full knowledge and support of the families who are the primary educators for that child and who know that child well. Now the challenge, and again, I'm not trying to beat up on our public schools, I'm just saying where they're handicapped is now, especially post-COVID, with all the stuff going on with technology, we have so many deeply wounded students in our schools that they're trying to find a way to just, how do you hold them together? But they don't have the freedom to preach the gospel. They don't have the unity with the families because they're serving such a broad array of families. So they're really struggling. But some families are rightly concerned about, what are you teaching my kid in the public school? You're getting into their spiritual life. Why can't you just get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic? And again, you can't just get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's not what they are. So that social emotional learning thing is a big thing in our schools. And what we do in Catholic education is we typically go back to faith and the virtues. Right, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance.
Yeah. I know you had an article recently, forming students in collaboration with families in the Cardinal Newman Society magazine. But you mentioned that mental health tops the lists of parental concerns, right, that you're worried about your children struggling with anxiety or depression. 40% extremely or very, 36% somewhat. So that's 6% worried, and this idea that kind of attending to the spiritual and emotional wounds of younger people is something that can be done kind of more easily when we have a vision of the whole person.
Yes, and it needs to be done carefully because, again, the parents have the primary responsibility here.
Yeah.
But this is why it's so important that a Catholic school be faithful and be open and honest about what it's doing and what its mission is and what its vision is. It gets back to the title of the class. What is my vision for your child and your child's health, right? It's not just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a secular thing like, oh, I want them to be self-actualized, so I'm going to take care of their self-esteem, and then I'm going to take care of their physical needs and their social belonging. It's the Beatitudes, right? It's the Christian vision for human well-being that we're offering and that we're working. So we have to do that faithfully. And if we're a Catholic school, but then we just start giving some of these unfaithful worldviews into our school, we let them sneak in, then we are doing damage to the child. And then, so we would not let the gender ideology, and the Vatican has been very clear about this, don't let that sneak into your school. That is not a proper understanding of the human person. So we've got to be really open with our parents because we're doing such intensely personal soul craft, as well as teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and all and sports and everything else. But we're doing it to this beautiful human person of mind, body, and soul united in front of us.
You mentioned earlier DEI. Maybe for listeners who might not be familiar with that, would you just say a little bit about what that is and how it's impacting maybe in terms of stories that you hear from principals or maybe even dioceses that are being
sure. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Good ideas, properly executed in a Catholic school. We are all about diversity, equity, inclusion, understood through the lenses of the Church's tradition and through the gospel. About what do those things mean? The challenge is that the secular world has, the secular materialists and the relativists have caught on to those terms to then use it as a cudgel to continue to advance relativism and materialism and antagonism in the schools in an effort to promote this worldview that is more in comportment with what they're seeking, which again goes back to the empire of desire. And then which goes back to the challenge with DEI is a lot of it is based on this idea of oppressor and oppressed, and this utopian vision that once we just do a little bit more damage to the oppressors or take them out of the way, we can start this utopia. So we're just going to have to go through a little bit more pain of some injustice to right the wrongs. So we're going to have to settle a few scores, and then after those scores are settled, then we'll be able to get to this great place. The other thing is into the DEI movement moved the radical gays and the transgendered movement, which then requires acceptance of that lifestyle and that morality, not tolerance, true tolerance, which is respecting those you disagree with, but actual acceptance of the behaviors. And then that gets our children into relativism because they're going to school being told that there's no male and female. It's okay. You don't have to be married to have children. You can be married to a person of the same gender. It came in under that DEI umbrella, which is doing so much of the social damage and spiritual damage to our children. And a lot of parents realize that and they're saying we've got to get away from that. And so they're worried in the public schools about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the social emotional learning, which are all important things to be discussed. But if you don't do them with the right perspective, you can lead the children astray or lead them into despair as opposed to leading them into happiness and resiliency.
Yeah. So let's turn a little bit to some of the Church's teachings. So in Vatican II in 1965, there was a document Gravisicimum, educazioni, and so what is that? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you give lectures on the whole, probably a few class periods dedicated to understanding it, but what might you say to maybe a Catholic parent or Catholic student who might be listening? Right? What does it mean? What does it teach, and why is it important?
I think it's a good summary of Catholic education, and it's not just dealing with Catholic schools. It also touches on Catholic universities, but then on education as a whole. So, to get one's bearings within the Catholic framework, I would recommend that document. It's relatively short. Like some of the documents, it's a little bit difficult to read. It's a little bit cumbersome. There's some long sentences and things. I think it's unnecessarily complicated in its syntax, but it's a good, solid document. And on that document, then, it was reflecting significantly on Davini, Ilius, and it just sets a nice, good good standard to begin the construction of an understanding of a Catholic philosophy of education. And then since that time, there have been, I don't know, I don't have the exact number, probably 20 or so documents that have been written on Catholic education. All of them will at some point go back and reflect on Gravisimum, because it's the I believe it's the only conciliar document about education. Although other documents touch on education, this one just talks specifically about it. And then from it have come a lot of other helpful documents. So one of the projects we worked on at Cardinal Newman, where I'm a senior fellow, is we promote and defend faithful Catholic education as our mission. But we wanted to make sure we understood what faithful Catholic education means. So we had to think, well, what is Catholic education supposed to be doing? And we shouldn't be doing what the Cardinal Newman Society wants, or what Benedictine College wants, or what we need to. What does the Church say? So several of us in the organization spent some time reviewing the documents, reading them, and really trying to distill what are those essential points. And other people, Archbishop Miller has done this as well, and he came up with his 5 models for Catholic education, I believe it's called, and he's over the target. We're reading the same documents, but they're pretty much 5 things that come up in Catholic education, and then the first of them is this idea that there's this divine mission for the school, that the reason we're doing it is for the good, the primary end of the student, which is salvation, and for the service of society, the common good. So it's salvation and service. That's why we open up the schools, right? The bishops don't say the SAT scores are low in the public schools. We've got to do something about these terrible test scores. There's something else going on. We're trying to do more, and we're trying to help that child towards his end of salvation, finding his purpose in this life and the next, so salvation and service. And then the other interesting thing in the documents is they're very focused on community. That caught me by surprise, is how important community is to these documents. And one of the things they mention is that the school is a type of ecclesial community. It's where the students encounter the experience of the church. So we have to do that. We have to do this experience carefully, so that as they're encountering the community of the school, they're encountering the community of the church. And the other interesting thing about that is that's a reason why we need faithful Catholic church teachers, because we're in communion with the church. If a teacher is not in communion with the church, we can't fulfill the mission of the school, which is to build a Christian Catholic community. And then, quickly, the others are obviously the one we all know is, we should be having, sacraments and prayer is something you would expect. And then the other is the idea of integral formation of the student, mind, body, and spirit, which we've been touching upon. And then the fifth thing, which is absolutely essential, is this presentation of a Catholic understanding of the world, of a Christian understanding of the world, which is what we kind of started the conversation with, right? There's so much more to the world than just than what the secular materialist world has to offer. It's an inaccurate view. So we want to offer that as well. So those are kind of the principles that we keep coming back on. So we touch these in the class. In my Foundations of Education class, I do this. We read some of the church documents, which then flesh this stuff out where you can see it come to life in the document.
Yeah, that's great. And it is helpful to kind of break it down in those 5 points.
Yeah. Yeah,
where you kind of begin with the divine mission, right? And then all the way down to that, Christian understanding of the world.
But this is also where you pull in sports and dances, right?
Yeah.
Because that's part of integral formation, mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah.
So what you're doing with your body and what sports can do with the integration of the mind and the body, phenomenal. St. John Paul II wrote a lot about this. He says, that's such a unique place where we get access to the fullness of the human person and the human experience. And then you get all, of course, the spiritual stuff that comes up with learning defeat, and then how to handle victory, and then how to deal with jealousies and pride and everything else that comes up in sports. So again, sports has a really good place to play in Catholic education. But again, you've got to see it in this whole realm of, is it serving ultimately the salvation of the student and the common good?
Yeah, so maybe, what are some, you have students that are now in the program, in the graduate program. Obviously, we have undergraduates as well, and you have more students, and you're kind of been doing a lot of work promoting and developing this new graduate program, and it's an online program, correct?
Yes, but again, as we talked about, one of the critical things in Catholic education is community.
Yes.
So we determined that the best way to do it is not just to do it online. So we have two-week residencies. So we're just getting ready for them to come in, and they come over to my house for dinner. I cook them food. We laugh together. We talk together. We eat together. We have a couple dinners. I'll take them on a swamp walk here through Florida. We'll have sunset at the beach together, and then bond together as colleagues. And then we can spend the rest of the time online, and then they go back to their jobs and back to their homes, and then they go through the bulk of the program online. But our experience is that it's so hard after hard days of work to go back on the computer and read and write another paper. But if you know Sister's waiting on the other end, or Guernsey's on the other side, and these are my friends, and there's that accountability which then helps get through the drudgery and the difficulty of graduate education online. So that's an important part of our program. And then again, it's also about networking. So not just through the Cardinal Newman Society, but groups like the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, the Chesterton Schools. It's important that these faithful Catholic entities get to know each other so we can cross-pollinate. And so that it's not just some abstract degree you learn online, but part of a broader movement, which is what Ave Maria is attempting to do as a university, to bring the thought of the church's thought into these various realms. So Ave Maria is bringing the church's thought on education to these schools.
Yeah, so, and it seems that there's a real just renaissance in Catholic education these days. I don't know, I mean, when we were in school, like in the 80s and this sort of thing, that it was not there were lots of Catholic schools, but it was not a heyday of richly Catholic schools really leaning into, the classical heritage or leaning into their Catholic identity. And now it seems like over the last 20 years, it seems like there's been exponential growth.
Most assuredly, yes. Yeah. A lot of that came out of the independent Catholic schools movement in the late 70s and early 80s. And then post-COVID, it's really taken off as the kind of the scales came off and people learned what was going on in schools. And there's DEI and CRT have pushed their way in, and people are it's clearer that there are ideological battles going on, and people are, I think, more in tune with what's happening with their children and looking for creative alternatives. So that's fantastic to see. Yeah, we went through some pretty bad. My school was quite bad back in the 80s. And now there's lots of options. And so we want to make sure we have the leadership. And then some of the schools that were bad in the 80s are coming back around because they realize, that we tried that, it didn't work. And Catholic education is not bad news. It's not a downer. And actually, it's actually pretty good for marketing and for differentiating yourself. It's people, there are all sorts of good-hearted people who just don't want another elite school. They want a school that can do it all and do it all in faithfulness and help their child flourish.
Yeah, I remember hearing somebody says that if Catholic schools are more genuinely Catholic, ironically, the educational options, say within the United States, become much more diverse, right? Which is great to have more options. And so we are kind of running towards the end of our time. I have 3 questions I like to ask guests on the show. What's a book you've been reading?
I am just finishing up Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. It's a very long book. I've been reading it most of the semester, and I found it very helpful. He tracks what we've been talking about here. His basic question is, how is it that back in the 1500s it was almost impossible not to go through life with a theistic worldview? And why is it today it's almost impossible to go through life with a theistic worldview? The default has entirely changed. So the young people today and the young families say it's not that they've necessarily rejected God. It's not even an option anymore because that's all switched. And he traces that path and makes some theories, which I find very good. And a lot of that is embedded in the stuff we've been talking about. I think he's over the target. So I've enjoyed that. It's been a stiff read, but I'm in the last 100 pages.
That's great. Secondly, what's a practice you do on a daily basis, or at least a regular basis, that helps you find meaning and purpose and draw closer to God?
Daily Mass is, that's just, we're so blessed in Ave Maria that's just, it's not even how could you not? How could you not go? And again, just being at Mass today and just taking those few moments out of the busy day, and then just remembering the sacrifice and the love. And how can you go wrong? How can you go wrong? So that's just, can't beat it. And I do find playing musical instrument. I just started taking musical instrument seriously, and that is actually kind of a daily practice, which calms the soul for me a little bit and just allows me to get out of my head and into another
And what
realm.
instrument is that, Dr. Guernsey?
The bagpipes, Dr. Dauphinais.
Yeah.
Dr. Dauphinais, for those of you who aren't aware, is my neighbor. So I do not play the bagpipes outside in my neighborhood. I go outside the edge of town to play so that Dr. Dauphinais has peace.
At least not too often. We love,
Not too often.
We love hearing them from time to time. They're great. And last question: what's a belief you held about God that you later learned was false, and what was the truth you discovered through the really the teaching of Catholic theology?
Going back to my my difficult high school education, I got through high school, a Catholic high school, having never read the Bible and not understanding that Jesus was present in the Blessed Sacrament. And I was not confirmed. And this was in a high-end Catholic elite prep school. And when I got to the university, St. Ignatius Institute, Father Fessio was my professor, among others. And then when I found out about the real presence, I was so shocked and mortified. And I said, why didn't they tell me this? What was up with this? And it was through reading the Church Fathers and reading, especially Ignatius of Antioch. I said, no, this is real. Why didn't they? And then once I came to see that, everything changed. And then suddenly it's like Mass makes sense. Going to confession makes sense. Everything just makes sense. And so that to me, even to this day, and so I like to ponder on this idea of that idea of the Eucharistic sacrifice, that why was the sacrifice so necessary? It's not just a meal. He could have just said, here's some bread. It's going to be my body. It's tied to this sacrifice, which is then tied to God's love for us and the importance of reality and the real the hardcore nature of reality, that sacrifice is required. You can't just sin and get away from it. Somebody's got to pay, and thank goodness it doesn't have to be me.
Wow, that's beautiful. And that's great, too, because I think about 25 years ago or so, maybe, you one of your first books was an edited volume for Eucharistic adoration. And
it came from that insight. Yeah.
Which came from your own experience of really discovering the beauty of what the fathers and others who had discovered about the presence of our best friend, right, and the greatest hero, basically, who sacrificed everything for us, is present with us.
And why wouldn't a Catholic school want to tell its students that? That just to me blows me away. But to your point, Dr. Davini, things are getting better. Things are looking up, and there are good options now. And there's good online programs. There's good homeschool programs. There's good Catholic universities. So it's getting dark, but the brightness is fighting back.
That's great. So, Dr. Guernsey, for people who are interested in learning more about Catholic education at Ave Maria, where would you direct them?
Right to our website, avemaria.edu, and click on our education program or on our graduate education program. I'd be happy to talk to you directly about it too.
Okay, great. And also just wanted to mention that we did have a podcast episode with Father Robert Sirico on, I think, Catholic and classical education.
He's doing some good work.
And some of the schools that he kind of helped turn around and is now doing more work through an institute he's founded as well. So people may find that podcast episode as well interesting. And if you're interested in listening to this talk about Catholic education at the university level, Provost Dr. Roger Nutt and I did, I think, the fourth or fifth podcast episode was on Excorde Ecclesiae and Catholic universities. So thank you so much for listening to our show today. If you enjoyed it, I encourage you to please subscribe to the show and encourage your family and friends to listen or watch us again. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Catholic Theology Show. Thanks, and God bless.